So today's video is going to be very interesting because I'm going to talk about one of the most anticipated gaming monitors of the year, the Alienware AW3423DW. So this is a very first monitor to come with Samsung's new qd-OLED panel, and this panel is supposed to be a huge upgrade over previous OLEDs from LG. It is faster, it has 175 Hz refresh rate, it has improved colors, it offers more brightness, and it should have a lower risk of burn-in, which are all very, very good things. Plus, this is also going to be my very first monitor review that includes proper response time testing. So, without further ado, let's check it out and see if it's all that we thought it would be. Let's go! This video is brought to you by Seasonic and their Prime Series power supplies. These top quality power supplies are very efficient, they're whisper quiet, extremely reliable, and my go-to choice for most of my test rigs and builds around here. And to make the deal even sweeter, Seasonic wraps it all up in a cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. The AW3423DW is a slightly curved 34-inch ultra-wide monitor with a 3440 by 1440p resolution and a refresh rate of 175 Hz. Now, fast 34-inch ultra-wides are not really new, and you can grab a VA or an IPS model for anywhere between $400 to $800. But because this monitor comes with a brand new panel technology, it will cost you a little bit more. So you will have to set aside around $1,300 or about the same amount of euros for this monitor right here. And I personally don't think that's a bad price. Plus, it will get even cheaper over time, but it is still important to mention that you can get a 48-inch LG C1 for less. And since neither PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X supports this ultra-wide resolution, this is primarily a PC monitor. I do like what they've done with the design though. The white and black color scheme is something that does stand out a little bit more than most typical monitors out there, and I think it's very well put together. It is not too bulky, the materials are nicely done, and it feels pretty sturdy. Now there's also some RGB on the back as well, which is enough to show a tiny bit of color on the wall behind it if you like that sort of thing, but if you don't, you can also just turn it off. It doesn't have any speakers, but I also think that is okay because most monitor speakers are usually quite disappointing. It is height adjustable, you can tilt it and you can swivel it, but you cannot rotate it 90 degrees. The stand is nice and sturdy and it does what you would expect it to do, but keep in mind that it is pretty deep, so you do kind of need to have a desk that is also a bit deeper, and if you prefer, you can also VESA mount it and not worry about the stand depth at all. But connections are pretty disappointing, so you get one display port and two HDMI ports, but these are HDMI 2.0 ports, so they are limited to 100 Hz, and you really need to rely on that single display port to make use of what this monitor has to offer. And even that display port has its limits. So DisplayPort 1.4 supports this resolution up to 175 Hz only in 8-bit mode. With 10-bit color, you'll be limited to 144 Hz, and 10-bit is ideal for HDR content. Now, 144 versus 175 Hz, it's not really a huge deal, and it doesn't matter that much, but I do think it is important that people are aware of this. Now, I assume that the reason behind it is that Alienware is supposedly using an older G-Sync Ultimate module, which relies on DisplayPort and kind of prevents them from using HDMI 2.1. So it is not without a reason, but it is still a shame to see this happen on what should be a top-tier monitor. But let's talk performance, starting with response times. And before I begin, I really want to thank Andy from Tech Team GB for developing this response time testing tool and for making it available to other reviewers. But keep in mind, it is still pretty new and there are still some things that we need to figure out, but we did get to the point where it's already really helpful at showing some performance numbers. Now, as many people know, OLED has pretty much instantaneous response times, and qd-OLED is no different. So we can see pretty much perfect 1 millisecond response times in most areas. Now, the only exception here is when the panel needs to go from completely black, which means that the pixel is off on an OLED monitor, to any shade of gray, and that's where we're seeing these 5 millisecond transitions. Still, this is an excellent result with perfect initial exponential response times, and perfect gray-to-gray transitions that all fall within the refresh window of a 175 Hz monitor. Now, there is a little bit of overshoot in most transitions, but it's all very minimal, and since the response times are so quick, it is not something that you'll ever actually see for yourself. Now, basically, motion performance is as good as it can get on a gaming monitor. Input lag is good as well. It's a bit faster than the LG G1 OLED TV that I tested last year, but it is still a couple of milliseconds slower than the fastest monitors on the market. So it's a very fast monitor, but if all you do is play competitive FPS games seriously, you could win a couple of milliseconds with some other displays out there. But when it comes to color performance and when it comes to overall image quality, this is where this monitor really shines. So the color range includes the entire sRGB gamut and 99% of the P3 gamut and 92% of the Adobe RGB gamut. So it is a bit wider than the regular OLED, but only by a couple of percent, not by a lot. And the default color profile is calibrated perfectly for the P3 color space as well, making this a good option for editing right out of the box. However, they did not include an sRGB profile, which I think is a bit of a shame, and they did include a profile called Creator, but that profile is actually not calibrated that well. So the best thing to do is to just leave it in that factory default setting if you plan to use it to create any kind of content. Now, since OLED panels turn their pixels off when displaying black, you get a perfect contrast, which is one of the biggest upsides of any OLED panel. Even if you're used to VA panels, for example, it is still a huge upgrade over traditional monitors. And because the contrast is so good, it makes up for the surprisingly low maximum brightness in SDR mode. So if you don't turn on HDR, it only goes up to around 265 nits, and that drops to 250 nits when displaying a full white image, which makes it one of the least bright monitors I've tested so far. But the contrast does help and makes it look much brighter than a 250 nit IPS monitor would look like. Still, if you do use it in a very bright room, it can be nice to have a bit of a higher brightness. I also kind of think they did this on purpose because OLED TVs usually have to limit the brightness of the whole panel when it shows a completely white image, and by keeping the maximum brightness pretty low to begin with, this monitor doesn't have these very sudden drops of brightness as soon as too many pixels start showing white. So in SDR mode, because of that limit, you don't get these annoying brightness drops, making this monitor much nicer to work on than any other OLED screen. And the reason I think that they did this on purpose is that when we turn on HDR here, the panel does go a lot brighter. So there are two HDR modes, a 1000 nit one and a 400 nit one. In the true black 400 mode, brightness and color tracking is really good, but brightness caps out at around 460 nits with small patches or just under 300 nits when displaying a full white image. In the HDR 1000 mode, I measured a peak brightness of just over 1100 nits, and small patches can actually hit 1000 nits or higher consistently, which is absolutely great for HDR games and other HDR content. But you can clearly see the brightness go down with larger zones. With 10% of the display showing white, it drops to around 600 nits, and we're down to under 300 nits once the whole display goes white. Now, to be fair, even a 10% patch is not really that common in regular content, so the subjective HDR experience while gaming or while watching something in HDR is really good in this 1000 mode. There are a few scenarios where you can see the brightness dropping, so if it really bothers you, you can also just swap it to the HDR 400 mode to smooth it out a bit. Now, personally, I prefer the HDR 1000 setting because it offers all the core elements for a good HDR experience. It has perfect contrast, it has wide color gamut and high brightness peaks, and unlike on the Samsung Neo G9, the colors are actually tuned really well. So it's really hard to believe that both panels come from the same manufacturer. Anyway, since with a QD-OLED, every pixel is its own light source, backlight bleed isn't really an issue. at all. Uniformity is great and viewing angles are excellent too. Now, they kind of claim qd-OLED should have better viewing angles than the regular OLED, but I honestly cannot see much of a difference compared to a couple of OLEDs that I have right here. So I would say it's great, but it's not a huge upgrade over traditional LG OLEDs. And honestly, that kind of applies to the whole panel experience. So every aspect of this new qd-OLED is really good. But OLEDs from LG are really good as well. So they also have a very wide color gamut, and while 1100 nits is a bit brighter than the 840 that I measured on a G1, that isn't as big of a difference as you might expect. So the biggest upgrade is the higher refresh rate, with the regular OLEDs being limited to 120 Hz, and that this monitor should have a smaller risk of burn-in. But I also cannot really judge this after having this monitor for only 2 weeks. And there are a couple of things that kind of make me wonder if this is really true. So the qd-OLED should be more efficient, and with that, it should have a smaller risk of burn-in. But the power consumption is still pretty high when it is displaying lighter images, varying from around 35 to 115 watts in SDR mode. Now, typically it stays around 50, which is acceptable, but 115 watts for a 250 nit white image isn't really super efficient. Also, after only 1 day of using it, it already started recommending that I should run that built-in pixel refresher to prevent burn-in. So even though I think it's great that it has all these protections built in, it also kind of suggests that the risk is still there and that you should probably do everything you can to prevent it. So I would still try to avoid those static images for way too long. I would turn it off when you're not using it and use the built-in tools to try and prevent having to RMA your very new, very expensive monitor. So overall, this really is an excellent monitor, and it's without a doubt one of the best display experiences that money can buy right now. And even though it is slightly better than older OLEDs in every single way, it is also kind of fair to say that it is not a huge upgrade as it was hyped to be. But it is also important to remember that this is the very first qd-OLED monitor, and it is definitely possible that upcoming ones will go even brighter or be even more colorful. Now, the main thing that will determine whether you should buy this or not is what you expect to connect to it. So if you want to connect your PS5 or an Xbox Series X, a bigger 16:9 OLED TV will just make more sense. So it is cheaper, 4K works better with these consoles as they are not really optimized for ultra-wides, and the image quality is still excellent. On the other hand, if you just want to use it for PC, I find 34-inch ultra-wides a lot nicer to work with than large 48-inch OLEDs that are just too tall to be on your desk, in my opinion. And the fact that you don't have to deal with those aggressive backlight adjustments in SDR mode and having higher speeds really makes this Alienware a better PC monitor than OLED TVs are. So if that is your case and you can afford this, you will absolutely love it. Then again, if you're not in a hurry, it could be kind of worth waiting a bit longer to see what else is coming with this qd-OLED technology. Personally, I'm kind of hoping they will release a 38-inch version that will offer just a little bit more workspace so I can kind of justify replacing my LG. So I really do think Alienware did a great job here, and other than those HDMI port limitations, it is pretty close to perfect. Now that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure that you subscribe to this channel to never miss an upload. Bye guys, and see you in the next one.